The subject of dispensation of food preparation for festival, it's a big part of our discussion today. So far, we understand two different categories. One is called melechet ochel nefesh, meaning we have some type of labor involved with the perform of immediate food that needed for eating, and that melechet ochel nefesh a person needs to do during the festival. There is another concept that it's called machshirei ochel nefesh, which is some preparations in order to have the food ready. Now we need to go to another phase before we hit the beginning of this chapter 3. If it's come to meat product, so a person needs to eat meat, a meat that prepared a day in advance versus meat that prepared the same day carries a total different quality. Versus fish, for example, if a person take a fish and at the eve of the festival he puts the fish in big bath, big tub, big one, the fish can continue on and he can use it the following day. So even the concept of melechet ochel nefesh, meaning food that you need for immediate need for the festival, allows, not all the labor involved with preparation for food is permissible. So now we zoom in the first Mishnah. The first Mishnah dealing with melechet tzeidah. Tzeidah meaning you're hunting for certain food. Now the question is, we explained several times, that if it's not ochel nefesh, we have the issue of doing that on the festival. Now, even you need to have the food for ochel nefesh, for immediate, are you allowed to go ahead and put some type of basket or something to cut the fish and have them ready for the food, for the immediate meal, or not? Are you allowed to basically slaughter animal on the festival for food preparation immediately? When, where, and how? So the conflict again, it's between melechet ochel nefesh, food that you need for immediate day, which is a festival, versus the act of preparation. Chapter 3, page 23b. Now, ein tzadin dagim min habivarim beyom tov. One may not trap fish from their ponds on a festival, even the intention is to eat them. 1 point Tosfot tells us, if you have a chance to do that in advance before the festival, then we have a problem for you to do it now. Now, Beivarim is like those large pool that contain fish. So the Mishnah said, "Ve'ein notnim lifnehem mezonot," nor may one place food before them, because you don't have the obligation to feed them. Rabbi Akiva, if you remember, who said in page 21b that you're allowed to feed animals, that apply that us animals that you are responsible for them, mezonotehen alecha, you are the owner, but fish that can support themselves independently by the water, you cannot, Rashi said, feed them on a festival. So let's read a little bit Rashi. Rashi tells us, Af al gav, even though the shchita ve'afiya u'bishul me'avot melachot hen, even cooking, baking, slaughtering, it's all part of the labor, vehutru, and we're allowed to do it for the purpose of the festival. Ta'ama, the reason Rashi said, Mishum de'i efshar me'erev yom tov, because you cannot do that at the eve of the festival. Why? Pen yitchamem v'yasriach. If you slaughter the animal day before, that meat can turn spoil and carries a bad odor. Aval tzeida, however, when it's come to hunting, Rashi said, efshar letzudo mi be'od yom, a person can hunt the animal in advance before the festival. Ve'yanichenu bimtzudato b'mayim, you put the fish in the water, ve'lo yamut, and you will not die, ulmachar yitleu, and the following day you can take it. So you see here, the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, derived from this Rashi, that when it's come to tzeidah, it's a biblical prohibition to hunt on a festival. Now, so therefore, if you take this fish and you put it in that large pool, large tub, remember, those days they don't have refrigerations. So you cannot leave them outside because it carry that bad smell, etc. So you put it, and then during the festival you put it out. So according to Rashi, anything that the person can do before the festival, you cannot do it during the festival, not the Rabbanan. Now you see a disputation between Rashi and Tosfot, because Tosfot tells us here, Rashi tells us, so if you need it letzorech ochel nefesh, for the food, so you can do it, but again, slaughter is one thing, but fish in the water it's nothing. Tosfot said, he followed what he said earlier on page 3, that since we are not allowed to do hunting, and this very close to ktsira, meaning to uprooting something. Why? Because you cut it, Tosfot said, mimkom chayuto, from the place that they have the basic sustenance. If it's a fruit, it's from the tree or the vegetable or the fish. So he said that's domele kotzer. It's very like someone who uprooted something, that it's prohibited in a festival, and that's the reason why they prohibited hunting fish. The Rosh said that that's called uvda dechol. That's something that's similar to an action that you're doing in a weekly basis, because in those days they do ktsira, tchina, grinding, and they did it in a large amount, and therefore it's rabbinic, it's not biblical, but it's uvda dechol. Now, the Mishnah continued and said, Aval tzadin chayav ha'of min habeivarim. However, one may trap an animal or bird from their enclosures, as the view is already captured, and therefore the action is not considered an act of hunting. Again, they have some type of fence around that, and usually those animals that are in the cage, or they're staying there in advance. And he said, "Venotnin lifnehem mezonot," and they put before them food, as one does for the household animal. So that's the Meforshim said he is a svara bifnei atzma. The Rashi said that that's another point. Why? Because he said, Rashi said that fish, aval dagim efshar lahem belo mezonot. Fish can survive without foods. Why? Rashi said, shehem ochlim shorshei asavim vekarka vegadol ochel et hakatan. Rashi said it's 2 points. They're eating some type of hyssop, or how do you call those greenery that comes attached both to attached ground in the water that grow automatically in the ground. So they eat those herbs, those grass, and also the large fish, it's the small one. So in other words, it's a tzvei dining, it's a two thing that one has nothing to do with the others. Now, Tosfot said, it's a disputation here. Tosfot said, you cannot put the food before them, because guess what? Tosfot said something makes a lot of sense. He said, guess what's going to happen next? A person, yavol atzudoto, a person go in and start hunting it. So in other words, according to Tosfot, unlike Rashi, there is a connection between the first din and the second din. And the second din is basically a consequence, a result of the first one. I would like to just elaborate another point here, which is important. The Pri Chadash, he quoted here Rashi, and he said that behemah, that animals, it's considering ki gidulei karka, is the same as some that grows on the ground because it's eating from the ground, versus fish. The Pri Chadash said it's not something that eating from the ground, and here's the opposite. So basically the Pri Chadash have here an issue with the Rashi. But Khatam Sofer explains that water carries a very different category. Here we speak about animals that are on the ground. Anyway, so Rashi said at the end, he said, Venotnim lifnehen mezonot, bimei achoref, during the winter time, tzrichin mezonot, those animals need food. Ve'af bimei hakaitz, even in the summertime, bimkom drisat bnei adam, she'en asavim olim bo, the place that people step in, so you don't have the grass coming out. It's like a empty spot. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, lo kol habivarim shavim. He said not all the enclosures are identical with respect to halachot of hunting, meaning that there are those you can hunt and there are those not. Ze haklal, when you're allowed to hunt them and when not. Kol, any animal. 24, hamchusar tzeidah, which means that enclosure whose trapping is inadequate, asur, you cannot, it's prohibited to hunt during the festival. Veshe'ino mechusar tzeidah, and those whose that the trapping is not inadequate, then mutar. So the definition is basically depend upon the size of the kluv, of the place that they cage. Small allow, large you cannot hunt on a festival. The Gemara asks, Veraminhu. Now we show a contradiction between the Mishnah, then the following Braita. Beivarin shel chaya v'shel ofot, enclosures of animals and of birds. Ein tzadim mehen biyom tov, ve'ein notnim lifnehem mezonot. One may not trap animals on the festival, nor may one place food before them. Now the problem is, you see a contradiction here. That's the opposite of what we said in the Mishnah. Kashya chaya achaya, kashya ofot haofot. You're contradicting what you said earlier about animals and about birds. because the Mishnah allow to hunt them from their enclosures, and the Beitzah prohibited. So the Gemara elaborated and said, Bishlama chaya chaya lo kashya. You don't have a contradiction from one place to another when it's come to animals. Ha Rabbi Yehuda, ha Rabbanan. The Beitzah follow Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that an animal trap is an enclosure whose trapping is inadequate, which means it is still necessary to pursue and apprehend the animal, and is not considered trapped, and therefore one may not trap it from the enclosure on a festival. And the other one follow the sages that said that the animal in an enclosure is considered trapped, and removing it from there is not considering an act of hunting. Ditnan, we learn in Masechet Shabbat, tractate in Shabbat, page 106. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hatzad tzipor lemigdal, one who trap a bird into a closet, which means you have a small closet. He'll cause the bird to go to the closet. Utzvi lebait, and a hirsch, a tzvi, right, to the house. So he said it's liable. Now it's funny because just today we have that incident with the bird.
It's a good thing we didn't try to push it into a closet.
Amazing. For those who are not familiar, for the Yizkor today we have a very important guests. We have a bird that came and visit us in a big sanctuary.
That's right.
And people say that that's most probably a soul. Anyway.
Came back to make sure that we were doing a nice Yizkor service.
That's right. That's what people said. That's what Bruce said. Yeah. Anyway. So basically Rashi said that tzipor, the bird, is considering be hunted only if you lock it inside the closet or something like that. But since the bird can fly out of window, so it's not considering an hunting. So they said, lebay to the mechayev, specifically when you talk about the house is the issue, that's called hunting. Aval beivarin, lo. But those large enclosures, it's not the hunting. V'chachamim omrim, the sages disputed Rabbi Yehuda and said, tzipor, if it's come to a bird, a person is liable for hunting it, if he caused the bird to get in lemigdal, okay, if he force it to go inside the what is it, like a tower, or utzvi, and a deer, legina, ulchatzer, ulebeivarin, garden, or into a courtyard, or into a enclosure. So, meaning that deer, it's considering hunted even it's inside the enclosure. So it means that's basically follow the sages, that you're allowed to hunt deer from that enclosure on a festival, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not considering a hunt inside that enclosure, and therefore you cannot take it from there, and you have to say that the Mishnah follow the sages and not Rabbi Yehuda. So Tosfot here have the issue with feeding them. Anyway, Ela ofot kashya. On the other hand, when you speak about contradiction between the ruling of the bird in the Mishnah and the Beitzah, that's the opposite. Because what we just said, that the bird's considering hunted only inside the closet, not in the house. So they said, and you may say that it's also not difficult. Why? The Mishnah permits beivar mekure. One speaks about roofed enclosure. Beivar sheno mekure. But the Beitzah prohibited trapping, referring to unroofed enclosure. in which the bird is not considered trap, and therefore it's an issue. So he said, Vehabait, but you see, when it's come to a house, the chebeivar mekure dame, that it's like a roof enclosure. Uben leRab Yehuda, uben leRabbanan, both Rabbi Yehuda and the sages, tzipor lemigdal ein, a bird trap into a closet, yes, it's considered a trap. Levait lo, while a bird into a house, no, it's not considered a trap. So again, the contradictions state. Amar Rabba bar Avuna, hacha betzipor dror askinan, she'ina mekabelet marut. So here we speaks about a free bird, a sparrow, which does not accept authority, some bird like that. She know how to run away, that bird. דתנא דברבי ישמעאל, למה נקרא שמה ציפור דרור? שדרה בבית כבשדה, that it's a free bird, go in the house the same as in the field. Always find a way to get away with this. השתא דאח תדלח החיה, החיה נעמה לא קשיא, הבה בבר קטן, הבה בבר גדול. This Mishnah speaks about small enclosure. The Beitzah that prohibited the hunting speaks about large one. So therefore the animal is not considering hunting. Give me an example of small enclosure. The large one. Any enclosure that you can run after the animal, and you jump one time, that small one, all the rest that they are larger, it's considering large one. Another option, all those that they have many corners that the animal can hide and distance from a person, you cannot find it. Beivar gadol, it's considering large enclosure. Ve'idach, and the other enclosure, beivar katan, it's considering a small one. Iname, another option, kol heicha de nafli tula de chatle ala adade beivar katan. Wherever you have enclosure, small one, that the shadow of those walls jump on one another, so that's small enclosure. Ve'idach beivar gadol, and the rest it's large one. Rabban Shimon Gamliel אומר לא כל הדברים שווים. Rabban Shimon Gamliel said not all the enclosure are equal. אמר רב יוסף, אמר רב יהודה, אמר שמואל, הלכה כרבי שמעון בן גמליאל, that you're allowed to hunt during the festival only from enclosure, that you don't have the issue of hunting. Omar le'abaye halacha michlad lefligei, which means, if you use the word halacha, it means that someone disputed. Amar leo ma'in nafka min lachmina. What's the difference for you if you dispute it or not? Amar le Gemarrah gmor zmorta tehe. Rabbi said to him, it's like a folk expression. He says, simply learn a lesson, let it be like a song. It means, is it sufficient to simply parrot the halachic ruling? You have to examine the issue and understand why you make it. It's just you just don't say things, you have to explain. Anyway, זה הכלל, כל המחוסר צידה, היחידה מחוסר צידה, so אמר רב יוסף, אמר רב יהודה, אמר שמואל, כל שאומר הווה מצודה ונצודנו. Any animal that one will say, bring a trap and we catch it, as the animal cannot be apprehended about the aid and a trap. Rashi here explained to us, I'm using my book, בירא כלומר ברש"י על הש"ס. כלומר שצריך לבקש תחבולות לתופסו. So simply speaking, Rashi most probably meant that a person may understand it the way that it's written in a literal way. That only in the place that you need to bring a trap, it's considering mechusad tzeda. So he said that Rav Yosef uses as an example. So you need to find a way how to catch it. but I elaborate here a lot. Let's continue. אמר לאביי, אביי challenged that said, והרי האווזים ותרנגולים, says, how about geese and chickens, that they are loose in the courtyard creatures, שאומרים הווה מצודה ומצודנו. They said, bring a trap so that we may catch it, as they freely roam about and evade capture. ותניא, הצד אווזים ותרנגולים ויוני הרדיסאות, פטור. We learn that one who traps geese, chickens, or domestic doves is exempt. Why? Because it's considered already trapped. So that's hardisaot is, Rashi said, is from the word Herod, that he was the first one to do it. That's based on the Gemarrah in Chulin 139. So he's not in violation of tzeidah, of hunting. אמר רבא בר אבונה אמר שמואל, הללו באים לכלובן לערב, הללו הם באים לכלובן לערב. You have to differentiate between those animals that come back to the cage in the evening versus those who not. So those who not, you need to bring the trap in order to cut them and put them there. So the Gemara challenged and said, "Vari yonei shovach v'yonei aliyah." How about doves of the dovecote and doves of the loft enter the coop in the evening? The ba'im l'chluvan ba'erev. Tanya, we learn in the Braita, "Hatzad yonei shovach v'yonei aliyah v'tziburim shkanu b'tfichim shebabirot chayav." So even one who caught these type of doves, he is in violation of hunting. אלא אמר רבא בר אבונה, אמר שמואל הללו, when you speak about all this example of geese and chicken, באים לכלובן לערב, they come back to their place in the evening, ומזונותן עליך. You have to treat them, you have to give them food. You are responsible for them. הללו, the dove that live in the dovecote, or the doves of the loft, באים לכלובן בערב, ואין מזונותם עליך. They come to the coop in the evening, but feeding them, it's not your responsibility. So it's not considering like was hunted. So, in other words, it's total different category, the Meiri said. Rav Mari Amar, Hani avide lervuye. These, the doves of the dovecote, are likely to flee from people, and therefore require, bless you, require trapping. While those, the geese, the chicken, and domestic doves, are not likely to flee from them. So the Gemara asks, all of them are also likely to flee when being pursued, even chicken. So the Gemara said, so we are speaking about those who are likely to flee to their coop. So, in other words, even they reach their coop, so did not remain still, continue the attempt to escape. So therefore, it's not considering that they trap. So, meaning the Magen Avraham said that according to Rabba Bar Avuna, those birds that come back to their whatever it is, cage, coop, cove, in the evening, and you are responsible for the food, it's considering like they're already hunted, and therefore you can hunt them even outside of their cage, even if you need to have, the Magen Avraham said, you need to have a metzudah, a trap to cut them. In Taf Tzadik Zayin he said it. And according to Rav Meri, it makes no difference. Next Mishnah, dealing with animals that it's already found, they caught in a trap during the festival. So even it's not considering hunting, we have another problem that it's called muktzeh, that it's set aside. מצודות חיה ועוף ודגין שעשאן מערב יום טוב. So imagine a fellow, he's a good man, he set up all these traps for animals, for birds, for fish. He set everything from before the festival. Yet, all of a sudden, now it's a festival, we have an issue for him to take it. Why? Because those, for example, fish that get in, it's considering muktzeh. What's the muktzeh? Muktzeh, it's basically anything that you do not have in your mind that they're going to be there on a festival. In other words, they came in, you put a large trap before the festival, and the fish came in during the festival. You don't have the mindset in advance for them, so they already entered the domain that's called muktzeh, it's set aside. אלא אם כן יודע, only if the person know in advance מערב יום טוב, before the festival in advance, that they are ready for food, that's different. So then it's not muktzeh. Here is a story. ומעשה בנוכרי אחד שהביא דגים לרבן גמליאל. It was a story of about a fellow, a non-Jew, that brought fish to Rabban Gamliel. ואמר, Rabban Gamliel said, מותרין הן, these fish are permitted, אלא שאין רצוני לקבל ממנו. But they don't wish to accept it from him, and Rashi said because he despised him. So the Gemara asks, מעשה לסתור? You have an incident that contradicts what you said before. So the Gemara said, because earlier said that you cannot take an animal when you not know in advance if they are hunted. So they said, chasurei mechasra. That's a well-known statement. You see it in many places. It was incomplete. Ve'hachektani. This is the way you should learn the Mishnah. Safek muchan asur. So in other words, it's not part of the Mishnah, but that's the way the Shita Mekubetzet said. That's the way you understand. Safek muchan asur. So again, I'm using here my book, ביאורי כלומר בראשי. Rashi here said, כלומר וזו שאמרנו לא ייטול מהן מספק. You should not take because it's a serious quandary. דהיינו ספק מוכן וספק מוקצה ואסור. You have here a serious quandary. If it was in advance and if it was maybe in a category of muktzeh or not. So here I wrote a lot, I just give you the vignette. The point is, Rashi said what we said before, Safek Mukhan Asur, that if it's a question of being prepared in advance, it's an issue, it's not a new din, but it's only explanation to what, in short, what Tanakama said. Another option, it's Chisur Mechasria is not to change the Mishnah or Braita, it's just a response of explanations. That's the Vilna Gaon said. And I brought here also the Tzlach. The Tzlach here elaborate a lot with the story in the Mishnah based on Yerushalmi. And the big question is, what exactly the difference between Tanakama and Rabban Gamliel? So I urge those who have the time to read, because it's extensive writing over this Rashi. Next, Rabban Gamliel matir, when it's a safek mukhan, when it's not clear. ומעשה נמי בנוכרי אחד שהביא דגין לרבן גמליאל ואמר מותרים לנו שאין רוצים לקבל ממנו. זה לא במשנה. אומר רב יהודה אמר שמואל הלכה כרבן גמליאל. So we follow Tanakama that if it's not clear that it was ready, that's prohibited. Vika lematneaha the Tanya. We learn in the Braita, Safek Mukhan. We are not sure if it was prepared before Yom Tov. Rabban Gamliel matir, Rabbi Yoshua oser. Rabban Gamliel prohibited, Rabbi Yoshua allowed, Rabbi Yoshua prohibited. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Rabbi Yoshua. So it's not really, Rashi said, it's not really difference between the two points, but according to the first one, the Shmuel said that the halacha is not follow Rabban Gamliel because you don't see the name of Rabbi Yoshua. But the second one, he said halacha Rabbi Yoshua. So it means Rabbi Yoshua is the one who prohibited. Now we see the third version. Vika demat la'aha. There are those who learn this point of Shmuel, the Tanya, who learn in the Braita. 24b. שוחטין מן הנגרים ביום טוב. One may slaughter animals from pans containing pools of drinking water on a festival. Okay? That's basically for the animal to be able to drink. Aval lo, however, you have to know that there is exception. You cannot do it for what? Min reshatot or min michmorot. Not from nets or in traps. Because they caught on a festival itself. And that again, safek mukhan. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer bar metzaan. If he walking and he found it. So it's clear, mekulkalim me'erev yom tov. If it was ruined before the festival, biyadua it's clear she'me'erev yom tov nitzodu. It's clear that they are trapped before the festival. Umutarin, you can use it. However, because the end of that trap is far away, and you cannot see it from the other side. So you have to have the assumption most probably it was earlier. Bar metzan mekulkalim biyom tov, biyadua shebiyom tov nitzodu v'asurin. However, if you come and found them out of order in a festival, it means all this balagan, all this chaos happened during the festival, and therefore you know that they are caught during the festival and they are prohibited. So now we said Haguf Akashya. You see a contradiction in the Beitzah. Because the first clause, Amarta bo matzat mekulkalim, bao matzat mekulkalim be'erev yom tov b'dosh me'erev tov nitzodu. He said that if you sell them ruin before Yom Tov, you know that's happened before that. That's for sure they happened before because you saw that trap wounded has feika, but if it's not clear, asurin, prohibited. Let's go to the close. If you found them wounded during the festival, however, you know that they are caught on the eve of the festival and they are permitted. So it's a basic contradiction between the first clause and the last clause. So he said, the brighter man, hasfeika, na'aseh kemi shenitzodhu b'yom tov asuri. So since it's an uncertainty, so they are considered as if they were caught on a festival. And therefore you're allowed to use them. Then he said the story about the non-Jew that brought Rabban Gamliel fish. V'amar mutarin lemai. What do you mean by saying that they allow, they're permitted? Meaning that they're allowed to eat them, or they allow only to accept them from him and carry them? Amar Rav amar mutarin lekabel. So meaning not to eat, but just to accept them. When it's come to carry, is more lenient. Right? But the others, not. There is the issue, how come, it's a muktzeh, anyway. But Levi amar mutarim ba'achila. Levi said, we don't follow halakha, but he says you can go and eat. Amar Rav lo lama limdan atzmo bet hamidrash efelu sha'achat. Now he says something fascinating. He said, Danan v'Levi avei kamalim de Rabbi, ki amra la'ar shmata be'orta. Amar, mutarim la'achila. So in the evening he said you're allowed to eat them, when he asked them. Betzafra amar mutarin lekabel. In the morning he said you can accept it, but you cannot eat it. Anadav beit midrash adrabi. Levi lo ava midrash lo adrabi. Listen to this. You have two students. One came before him in the evening. Both of them came in the evening. And he said you can accept it, but you cannot eat it. Alright?
Hmm?
I'm sorry. He said you can accept it and eat it.
Okay.
Then in the morning he said no, you can accept it and not eat it. So he said look at the difference between a persons that perseverely come to Beit HaMidrash and someone not. Because I was there when he asked second time and we clarified, and he said the only man to accept but not eat. But my colleague who was only last night, guess what? He heard that everything is permissible. Meitive. It's an important lesson. Alim na adam atzmo mi Beit HaMidrash. Person should not prevent himself from attending the study of all, even for one moment. Such a deep Musa lesson. Anyway, Meitive, because think about it, it's tremendous change in halakha just overnight. מי טבעי נוכרי שהביא דורון לישראל. אפילו דגים המפולמים ופירות בני יומן מותרים. So you give him, the non-Jew give him the gift during the festival. So even it was a wet fish or fresh fruit that he caught them from the tree during the day. And that's basically according to Rabban Gamliel, was the only Tana that was lenient, Rashi said. So he said, Bishlama leman damar mutaren lekabel shafir. The one who said that you can accept but not eat, we understand. למאן אמר מותרים באכילה, פירות מיומן משאר לאכילה. The fruit that he just did it, who told you? Basically we should remember that we said it many times, that sometimes the non-Jew does work, and we in many conditions cannot have any advantage of that if he does that, during the sacred days. ולטעמי, פירות בני יומן משאר ובטלטול, the fruits from that day, who told you that they can carry them? Ela, you have to say, בחברי דאדימי ופרא דכבישה בירקה עסקינן. But you have to say, guess what? You have to speak here about fish whose grill are still red and with produce that is preserved in greens, not the produce that was actually picked on that day. So, Amai Karel Bnei Yoman. So why you call them the same day? Shehen ke'en Bnei Yoman, that they are like those similar to produce picked on the same day. So Rabbeinu Hananel have here a challenge with all of that, because there's the issue of maritime. And Rashi said it's not the issue. Anyway, Amar Rav Papa tells us, Hilcheta, that's the halacha. Nochri she'evi doron l'Yisrael b'Yom Tov. A non-Jew brought a Jew a gift on Yom Tov, on a festival. Im yesh me'oto hamin bimchubar. Let's say he brought in fruits that connected in that season to the branches, to the tree, etc. And there are other produce that was not taken. Asur, you cannot carry and move that fruit because it may happen during the festival. In general, if you have a fruit that was attached to, for example, branches, ground, whatever it is, tree, and was disconnected, uprooted, it's muktzeh. You cannot use it. And even Rabbi Shimon, that was most lenient, as we study very early in this Masechet, page 2, he agreed that in a place like that, for example, someone put certain fruits to make them dry on the top of his roof in a heat, so he cannot use them during Shabbat, during Yom Tov. So he said, Nama asurim bichdei she'asu, because that's the time between cutting the fruit. You cannot derive joy from that Melechet Yom Tov, work of festival. V'im en moto amin b'mchubar. If it's nothing that it's attached, so it means that it happens before the festival. So if that gift was brought mitoch hatchum, which means within the 2,000 cubits from the city, mutar, because that work not occurred on the festival, because it was not uprooted during the festival, and is not brought outside of the domain of 2,000 cubit. 25. Chutz latchum asur. If it's outside of the limit of the domain, it's prohibited. So that's based on the Mishnah we studied in Tractate Shabbat 151, that we're not allowed to use any items that non-Jew brought for us on the Shabbat or festival, because it's involved with violation. והבא בשביל ישראל זה, but this fellow that came from outside the limit for this particularly fellow Jew, מותר לישראל אחר, but another fellow Jew can use it. So in other words, Rashi said that the prohibition, listen carefully, is just for that specific person that was done for him, but someone else can derive benefit from that. We discussed this chapter a lot of halachot involved with animals, and I know that many have animals. So here, Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 497. One may not catch fish on a festival, even from a small pond. Magen Avraham ruled that if the water is clear and the pond is small, it is permitted as the fish are considered already caught. The Mishnah Berurah, however, prohibits the practice even in such a case. How about putting a food for the animals, before the animals? So the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 497, he said that one may not place food or drink before an animals, birds or fish that consider muktzeh, set aside on a festival, lest he come to take them. So that's a different story. The Magen Avraham said that it's permitted, however, in the case of a non-kosher animal where this concern does not apply. Now, Nekudot HaKesef said, he's citing the Bach, he said if one caught fish before the festival and placed them on a small receptacle full of water, he is permitted to feed them. It's a different story. Ezeu tzayid, when we speak about trapping, today we talk a lot about trapping. So that's Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 316. One who traps a bird or a deer is not considering having apprehended it unless he drove it into a house or into an enclosure in which it is caught. In the case of a sparrow, the tzipor dror, he is liable only if he drove it into a closet or a small cage. If the bird is not completely trapped, the offender is exempt, but the action is nevertheless prohibited. Accordingly, if a sparrow flies into the house, one may not shut the windows, unless this is necessary due to the cold. As the other animals and birds, it is prohibited in all cases, and thus the Mishnah Berurah said, as it constitutes a biblically prohibited labor. Now the Rambam tells us, it's a Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 10. One who removes fish from the place and put them into a small container of water is considered as having trapped them. And whereas one who hunts a lion or some other beast is liable only if he drives it into a cage that can hold it. The halacha is according to the opinion of the sages, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Bar Rav Huna. And the Rambam said in Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 10, he said that any enclosure whose walls are so close together that the shadows overlap in the middle, or where one can catch the animal into a single stoop, it's considered a small enclosure. If one drove an animal into such an enclosure, he is liable. Now, there is a definition, the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim in 497 said, with regard to any creature whose present trapping is inadequate, and with regard to which one must say, bring a trap so that we may catch it, if one may not trap it or place food before it on a festival, unless he will incur a loss if he does not feed them. That's the Mishnah Berurah citing the Rashba. But basically, any animal whose present trapping is not inadequate may be caught and fed on a festival. So basically, we follow Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. How about trapping domestic birds? One is permitted to catch geese, chickens, and doves that were raised for food and one need not designate them on the day before the festival. A God-fearing person, however, that's the Magen Avraham said, should designate the one he wants beforehand. That's basically his side the Maharshal. This applied, the Magen Avraham said, to all domesticated birds that return to the coop every night and are fed by their owners. If they are not accustomed to the coop, they are treated like other animals and birds. So it's a huge difference. We also talk about trap and animals in general. If an uncertainty exists whether or not an animal or bird was caught on a festival, which is if a trap was set on an evil festival and the animal was found caught in it on the festival, the animal is prohibited on a festival unless it is known that he had been caught before the festival. That's basically follow Rabbi Yoshua, who rendered animal prohibited even in the case of uncertain trapping. Now, in general, when we have an uncertain situation, an animal about which there is uncertainty as whether or not it was caught on a festival is prohibited on the festival. So therefore, if one found an animal in a trap on a festival, so it's an issue, it's prohibited unless he knows that he had been caught the previous day. If he found the trap out of order or on the evil festival, that's a different story. It may be presumed that the animal has been caught before the festival. So in general, the last halakha I would like to share with you today, it's an issue that we discuss at length, getting gift on a festival. Imagine that's Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 5:15. You have a fellow, non-Jew, and he give you a gift on a festival. So if you have one who brought merchandise into a town inhabited mostly by Jews, so the halakha is follows. If there is produce of that species still attached to the ground, the produce brought by the non-Jew is prohibited to be eaten even by one of whom he had been brought. That's the Ramah. But after the conclusion to the festival, it's a different story. So again, what I suggest in this type of questions, you have to ask a prominent rabbi, because every case it's really different. We have to differentiate, number one, what exactly brought, when exactly it's brought, in which day of the festival it's brought, and how the circumstance involved. But based, big discussion between the Sefer Mitzvot Katan and the Ramah, in Shulchan Aruch, Magen Avraham, etc. It's Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 5:15.
Boyachem leshuloim malachai yeshuloim malachai